We should be live.
Live on YouTube. So, good morning. I'm the executive director and welcome everybody. If you're joining us via Zoom and would like to testify, please sign up through the Google form link and also linked on the meeting agenda. Today, Deborah Martin is on vacation, so Jimmy as VP has agreed to chair today's meeting. And thank you everyone for your patience as we are delayed in getting started. I'm going to hand it over to Commissioner Jimmy Van Bramer.
Good morning. My name is Jimmy Van Bramer and welcome to the Public Design Commission meeting. Our terrific PDC President, Deborah Martin, is unable to attend today's meeting. So as Vice President of the PDC, I will chair today's meeting. Today's meeting is being held in person at City Hall. Members of the public can attend and give testimony either in person or remotely. The public meeting is now commencing with the consent agenda and items number 28530 to 28553. Please note Commissioner Tisch's recusal on item 28551. Are there any other recusals to note? Let the record show there are no other recusals. I'll now call the vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. Isabel Castilla.
Approval.
Lori Hawkinson.
Approval.
Bill Heinsohn.
Approval.
Manuel Miranda.
Approval.
Susan Morgenthau.
Approval.
Merrill Tisch.
Approval.
Mary Valverde.
Approval.
And I also vote to approve all. Let the record show all in favor. The consent agenda is approved. We will now continue with the public hearing portion of the meeting. The first item is number 28554, the conceptual review of the Shirley Chisholm Monument by Amanda Williams and Olakan Haifas in Prospect Park at Parkside Avenue and Ocean Avenue, Brooklyn. Per standard procedure, the applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. We can now proceed with the presentation.
Go ahead, Amanda. We are ready to begin.
Okay, I thought Kendall was going to give some remarks. I apologize. Good morning. My name is Amanda Williams. I am co-author of the Shirley Chisholm Monument along with Olalekan Jayafis, also affectionately known as Lake. We are artists who trained as architects at Cornell University. Next slide. I'm going to go through a brief, actually, I might be able to control. No, I cannot. Okay. I'm going to go through a brief explanation of some of our past works and then give you a summary of our winning entry and then give you an update on where we stand with the conceptual review. So this is work I've done in the public sphere as an artist and architect. Next slide. I'm originally from Chicago and live here now and do several works that consider issues of place and placemaking on the South Side. I have a variety of projects that call attention to inequities in the built environment. This is a project called Colored Theory, in which I painted abandoned homes that were slated for demolition to call attention to the history of redlining and other practices that make neighborhood sustainability difficult. Next slide. This is another example. Next slide. Also work in St. Louis, Missouri as part of a project with the Pulitzer Arts Foundation and Washington University called Pixel, where we shrouded a building that was also slated for demolition in gold, and then did a series of public programs that talked about what it means for buildings, both everyday and monumental, to go away in a community, and what it takes to rebuild those communities and make those sites places of viability and civic engagement again. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This is work by Lake. Lake has also done a number of public projects, some temporary and some permanent, around the country. Next slide. He often brings in conversations of place, this is in Cleveland, and issues both historic and contemporary, and highlights figures that are important to those places. Next slide. We use a variety of materials, both permanent and temporal, depending on the setting and the required performance of the material. Next slide. This is in North Carolina. Next slide. For the Shirley Chisholm project, we were part of the project that is the She Built New York program, which is looking at 5 historic figures that played a strong role in shaping New York City. We will be the first of the 5 with Shirley Chisholm in Prospect Park on the Ocean and Parkside side of the park entrance. Next slide. We originally submitted this proposal as an invited call and were selected as the winners. Our strategy for the project was to have Shirley Chisholm be represented at 2 scales primarily. One would be her outsized figure and kind of iconic visage in her signature patterned attire and her large afro, and then also her role as the first Black woman in Congress. So we combined 2 of those components together and then intersected them with a third. Next slide. That also marked the fact that this site is at the base of the entrance to Prospect Park. And so thinking about English gates and the filigree that might be associated with that. Next slide. And our original proposal was to carve out a portion of the ground in the shape of the congressional arc of seats, and to highlight her seat as a way to also invite people to think about engagement with the civic process. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So the feedback from that was to refine some of that component and really think about what the proper scale was, and to also think about both tripping hazards and climbing hazards that could arise, as well as difficulties that would be presented with maintenance related to sculpting the ground or particular materials we might use that might require enhanced maintenance related to the project. Next slide. In our updated design, we've addressed those items first by reducing the overall height from 40 feet to 32 feet. The trees that lined the site that are being redeveloped as part of the larger improvement to the area exceed that height. So she will sit below that, but in the context, still at a large scale that's visible from the further lengths of the vista, so that she will be a sort of beacon from a distance. As you move closer, we've emphasized the Capitol building shape and also increased the heights of the openings that serve as pass-throughs from the sculpture into the park, so that it makes it more difficult to jump and grab onto. And then also providing mesh for the portions of the filigree that could get little hands or arms caught, or people that are trying to wedge feet to climb the sculpture, to make that process more difficult. And then also remove the sculpting of the ground and the railing that would have to accompany that to make it flat, but to change the texture or the pattern of that inscribed congressional seating, so that it's still represented, but it creates no ADA hazards. And then also have been thoroughly exploring materials that have a natural finish that will patina or can be patinaed, so that painting that likely could result in wear or scrapes or the need to repaint frequently is minimized. Next slide. We also explored the flora and fauna of Barbados, which is Shirley Chisholm's native home, and then also those of Brooklyn, which was also her home, so that the filigree that we use for the portion that faces the entrance to the park will be a mix and a kind of celebration of both of these. Next slide. And then really thinking in depth about that color history of the greens and some of the blues that both can represent the patinas that are found in other public structures in and around Brooklyn, but then also things that will weather and wear evenly and allow a kind of colorful beauty without necessarily needing to paint. Next slide. There'll also be some integration of bronze, both in the profile along the edge of the silhouette, and then also looking to think through some of the inscription of words on the ground, either as inscribed stone or potential inlay of bronze in strategic locations. Next slide. And so you can see that we're still in the process of exploring these components about whether the carving of an inscription or the inset can work to highlight both where her seat was. This is not her actual seat location, but just an example to show what it might look like. And then the way that we can change either paver material or paver texture to give a sense of that space. Next slide. This is an overhead view so that you can see where she sits in relationship to improvements that have been made in the overall site, and then the heights of the trees that are in the vicinity of where she would be located. Next slide. And there you can see it in elevation in relationship to the other elements. Next slide. And then here's some renderings that would describe what I was explaining about the inscription into the ground, and then also that bronze silhouette that will highlight the three intersections. Next slide. I think there's one more, two more, three more, and finally the night shot. So with that, I'm happy to take questions or clarify anything that I might have spoken over too quickly.
Thank you very much. Srayoshi, has anyone signed up to testify?
Yes, we will now hear in-person public testimony, but I do not see anybody in person. So I will ask if anybody is here. No, but there is one remote testimony I see. So Rebecca, has anyone signed up for remote testimony?
Yes, we have one, and let me just see if they're on. Suen Chong.
Yes, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
So you have 3 minutes for testimony, and you may begin. We'll let you know when the 3 minutes is up.
Hi. So I've emailed written testimony to the Design Commission email address, but I'll give a summary of my testimony. I'm a resident of Prospect Lefferts Gardens, and I frequently use this park entrance as well as all of Prospect Park. Really, it's our backyard. And I just really wanted to encourage the commission and the artists to consider an element that maybe you usually take as given, and that's place. But as the artist said, this is very much, about placemaking. And so I think it's an integral element of the design. I do really like the idea of combining the likeness of Shirley Chisholm with the congressional seats in a base around her to emphasize her role as a trailblazing Black female politician. However, this is an extremely busy entrance, especially in the summertime. I have seen literal stampedes at this entrance. I don't know why, but I've seen them. And this work is placed directly in front of the entrance. It looks like it might restrict pedestrian circulation. There is, however, a location that it seems like it's tailor-made for, given the shape. And I know the artists have said in past presentations they'd like it to be a community gathering space. And that's the old circular fountains at the Rose Garden, which is also under reconstruction. Some of you might have seen parts of that. Those have sort of a sunken, circular sunken base. That Rose Garden space has always been used for gatherings, but it's not a through road, unlike this location where I understand they would have to eliminate portions of the roadway in order to make space for the monument. This particular space in front of the Parkside entrance, while I do think it deserves artwork, it's very small compared to the other entrances like Grand Army Plaza. And so scale is also an issue. This is quite large compared with the surrounding buildings, which are 40 to 60 feet tall. It's also very large compared to all of the other figure monuments in the park. But if you can reconsider those two elements, I think we all would be very excited to have this beautiful artwork. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional members seeking to testify? Okay, if not, Jimmy, if you take this over.
Thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions or comments? A reminder to please speak into the microphones when talking. Isabel.
I would like to start. Thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for such a beautiful artwork. I live in the neighborhood. This is my main park entry, and I always felt it needed something. So I'm really glad to see this. I think the scale of the artwork and the revisions that you've made make it fit very well within the space. I just have a couple of practical questions about the detailing of the project. The first one is whether you are planning to replace the paving on the entire plaza to incorporate the engravements that you're planning, but also to have a more cohesive, I guess, siding on the space.
So yes, the short answer is yes. We have been working closely with the Parks Alliance on a larger project that was already in place when we were invited to this call. So there is a restructuring of the bike lanes, as the testifier mentioned, the pass-throughs or the curb cuts. So all of this is in progress at the same time, and we've had started just at the beginning of just before COVID of doing site visits and talking about coordination so that there's a clarity and a kind of seamlessness between the larger decisions about the paving, which we have conversations about, but ultimately don't control, and the paving that we would use so that they're symbiotic. So we have taken that into account and are very, very sympathetic and want there to be a kind of synthesis so that it doesn't seem like something that's been sort of plopped down.
Mhm.
So we're actively engaged in those conversations.
That makes sense. The paving there has a lot of uprooting. It's very cracked. So I appreciate the idea that this is going to be a more cohesive intervention and an upgrade of the plaza. The paving there also does get quite slippery when it rains. So I would just caution as you explore the material for the engravings on the ground that you also consider that, because they're quite tight and it is on the path of travel. So you want to make sure that they don't have any potential for slippage. My other question is, it's also very practical. You mentioned the idea of switching to materials that weather as opposed to painted materials. But if I caught your narrative correctly, one is going to be patinaed bronze, which is what is represented in the more warmer tone. And another one, the green is painted steel. Is that correct?
We're hoping not to have painted steel. We're hoping
Okay.
that, it's not quite a hybrid, but other metals that could receive a patina.
Mhm.
Also, the idea is that at the height, if you're looking at this picture right now, where you can see the Capitol building, that can be a material that's going to be a quote unquote high touch area, even if people are not literally touching it. That has the highest chance of either vandalism or inadvertent scraping or rubbing, as opposed to the higher components. So there also is an opportunity to think about seaming right along that line so that we can use something higher that maybe is more cost effective or accessible, that's going to have less touch, and then really put the emphasis on something that's super, super durable on that lower
Mhm.
portion, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
We're still in
Mhm.
conceptual phase, so we're playing with that, but the aim is to ultimately not try to have it be painted, but still achieve a kind of high value in terms of its color, that warmness in contrast to that patina.
Got it. So I think the choice of bronze is a great one because bronze actually does patina based on touch. So I think if you also want to think about a material that is expressing people's engagement with the piece, I think actually it would be an awesome additional layer to it. I don't know what the other piece would be, but I'm glad to hear that it's not painted steel. I think at this particular level of height, painted steel is something that will be very prone to vandalism, to scratching, to graffiti. This is a neighborhood that has a lot of that as well. So we do need to think about materials that can be easily cleaned and sustain those uses, unless, of course, you want some of that to be part of the life of the project. So I think when you select materials, start thinking about, human interaction, and is that something you want reflected? On the less exciting part, we also should think about dog urine. Unfortunately, this is like a crazy amount of dogs that enter through here. Those little planters are completely host every single day. So also in the selection of materials, both the ground and those vertical surfaces, just think about materials that can sustain that. And again, that staining is not something that will detrimentally affect the integrity of the artwork. Because I think it's very beautiful, and urban pieces really do deserve to be touched and engaged with, as opposed to be put up on a pedestal. But there's just also these alternative things we need to think about. But thank you so much for a beautiful piece.
Okay, thank you for those comments.
I just wanted to add, first I wanted to say that I'm so excited about this project, especially, with the She Built projects, and that for Yuan Lake's design, which shows really a contemporary vision for a monument to an individual, which is something we don't see a lot, I would say. I don't see a lot here. So I really applaud you for, bringing the person and the person's identity to this, and also allowing it to involve the engagement and the urban design vision that you're creating. So, I'm just really excited about it. I look forward to seeing these details, some of them that Isabel's mentioned. I'm also, as you get further into it, I'm going to be really interested in how it meets the ground. As architects, we look at those kind of things. So really excited about it, but congratulations to Cultural Affairs. It's really, a great, I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I
Any-
just wanted to say that this project is really beautiful. I'm very excited to see it come to fruition. And I think that the choices of palette and the silhouette are really interesting and dynamic. And I think it goes beautifully with the landscaping. I think it'll be really a great addition to the city, and I look forward to seeing it in the future.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Any thoughts or comments? I will just add, I think this is the most exciting project, or the project that excites me the most that I've seen since I've been a commissioner here, because it's so powerful. And I think Shirley Chisholm is such an incredibly important and powerful figure in politics and government and activism, and for Black power in elected office, for Black women, and for it to be this grand on this scale in this place seems so perfect and so fitting. And I also feel like this could also, we talked about Barclays earlier as a place where people convene, and oftentimes protests and marches and rallies take place in and around that place. This could also be a place in the future where people say, let's meet here, and some or many powerful political rallies, marches, and events will happen in and around this space, which I would imagine Shirley Chisholm would love that idea. So congratulations to everyone who helped to make this a reality, and will make it a reality. And I will just summarize briefly. Obviously, a lot of incredibly laudatory compliments from the commissioners, but just to synthesize Isabel, the importance of coordination and seamlessness with respect to paving, cohesive intervention, obviously attention to materials, and then the materials themselves, the desire for patina bronze, and the importance of recognizing the human touch impact with sustainable materials, and of course, ever practical attention to our dog friends who may also encounter the monument and the surrounding area, and the attention to making sure that their interventions are managed in a way to keep it as beautiful as it deserves to be. And of course, Lori and Mary and all of us incredibly impressed with how visionary this is, and what an important work it is for the city of New York and for Brooklyn. And that we can now take a roll call vote on item 28554. Commissioners, I will call your name, and please state your vote. Commissioner Castilla.
Approved.
Commissioner Hawkinson.
Approved.
Commissioner Heinzen.
Approved.
Commissioner Miranda.
Approve.
Commissioner Morgenthau. Commissioner Morgenthau, are you with us?
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Tisch.
Approved.
Commissioner Valverde.
Approved.
And I also vote to approve. So let the record show all in favor of this incredible project for the city of New York. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This is exciting. Okay, shall I excuse myself?
We will now begin. Thank you all. Congratulations.
Okay.
And we will now begin the committee meeting with the preliminary review of the construction of an offshore wind operations and maintenance building and adjacent site work at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Yep. We will not hear public testimony or vote on this project today, but presenters, as you arrive, you may begin when ready.
Gail Rothstein. On behalf of the VDC, I'd like to thank you and staff for all of the reviews, time spent, the site visit that have brought us to this successful design. Our presenters today from Equinor, a brief statement from Calvin O'Brien, and then from Jacobs, Al Consoli, and Jade Paul will present. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Calvin O'Brien, project engineer for the delivery of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. So I know folks have seen our presentations in different forums. Did just want to frame what we're here to talk about today, which is the operations and maintenance base for the Empire Wind and Beacon Wind project located in the northwest corner of SBMT. So Al and the team have worked quite a bit over the last 10 or so months to develop the design for feedback from this committee and the community. So we hope that the items to the aesthetics that he's done do meet the goals of the overall project. We've done a number of other programmatic things that hopefully you saw in our letter to try and address other concerns from the community. A learning center overlooking the site, giving the community a chance to see the site and go out, even have tours of the facility to help address some of the concerns of access to the waterway. So without too much further ado, I'll hand it over to Al to talk about the design updates, and we're here for any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. Good morning. Since we've been here, we've done an extensive redesign of the building. And what you saw back in December now looks completely different. The form is still the same, but we've incorporated now a new concept based on the feedback that we received from both the community and from your commission to incorporate this now into the whole reason why this project is here, and that is for wind, to help bring wind energy to New York City and to incorporate that now into the building. So now the building ties directly into the context of what the entire program is about. So the way we've incorporated that is we've incorporated a new sail design, what we call a wind sail, and that picks off the turbines that are going to be part of the wind farm. So that's what the primary reason for these fins are that you'll see in the new elevations as I go forward. We've also added a new feature, which is this element here, which is a kinetic wall. That kinetic wall will now move with the wind, and it won't vibrate very much, but it will show a reflectant change in light as it is hit with the different wind in that area. So we're very comfortable with how this now looks, and we hope that you're satisfied with our new design. Just to give you an idea, when we met with the commission previously, we showed a number of different sketches. So this is what it started off with conceptually, and this is now what the wind sail will look like. And we've taken that a little bit further throughout the building. So we've incorporated now a polycarbonate panel along the southern end of the building on the east side. This is now the primary office area where we have the sail going around the building. We've incorporated a stainless steel panel at the base and along this node here, which helps us in the transition between the two sides. And we're also now developed a kinetic wall from this original sketch in this corner up the front. And that helps us define the entrance. So these are the two-dimensional elevations that were included in the package. And again, this is the kinetic wall here. And you'll see that this is where the rhythm of the sails come through. But what you don't see is how the sails are actually positioned. This is what we looked at initially to draw some concept from, in which we have this now panel that will come out and it'll undulate out from the wall. So actually curve away from the wall. And what we've incorporated now along this is I just want to advance to this elevation here. This is now what these will look like. So these are the fins that'll come out from the building wall, from the curtain wall itself, and they'll be perforated. The reason for that is we're going to now have a continuous band of curtain wall along the wall itself. And that'll allow us for an opportunity to place glazing across the entire perimeter. And you'll be able to see through these panels. And then where we have breaks, you'll be able to see directly out where you won't have a panel in front of you. And this is the rhythm on the north elevation now that we've created. So this gives an idea as to how these modules would work. And between the two bands, we're looking at about a 6-foot panel, but the entire wall now will be a curtain wall, where previously we were looking at a rain screen design. So now this is what our front elevation will look like. And we removed the fence just for clarity purposes of the rendering. And here you can see the kinetic wall, which we will have some identification of the property. Right now, this is a placeholder that we've incorporated into the design, and we will have the windows wrapping around the building. The use of the perforated panels, again, allows us to be able to see through them and to be able to have the gaps inside so we can have clear vision directly out. And this illustration gives us probably one of the best examples of how that will look with regard to the windows and how that treatment will be taken care of. This also was an ideal location for the kinetic wall because that's where our entrance volume is. So we were able to incorporate that into an area where otherwise we would have a blank wall, and we didn't want to have that. So this became a natural location for this. And by incorporating the stainless steel here, this allowed us now to create a node between the two halves. The polycarbonate panel, we broke down a little bit as we look at the building elevation along the front. And I want to get to, actually, I want to go back a bit to these nodes here. What we did is we incorporated penetrations within the polycarbonate panel to help accentuate the entrance doors, where we're going to have entrance and exits at each of these positions. So we've changed the panel and not have it go completely down across the entire length, but we've now highlighted where we have the doors, and we'll continue a stainless steel base up and through this area. So this is our view from the waterfront, and this is our outdoor patio deck that'll be elevated. We have an employee area that Jade's going to talk about a bit in a few minutes. And this is where we have the elevated substation that's going to provide power for the overall building. A detail of what the kinetic wall will look like. And this is now the open view underneath where the building will meet grade. The office volume is above, and this now is completely open, where before we had it broken down with a couple of enclosures, which we've now relocated. And this is what our proposed entrance is going to look like as well. So as you can see, the Equinor logo is shown here, but again, this is just a placeholder. We're going to go through a whole signage package with the client and then show that to you when we have that ready. So if there are no questions, I'm going to pass this over then to my colleague Jade, who will talk about the landscape architecture. And just so you can see here, these are the additional penetrations that we made within the panel. So at each door position within the polycarbonate, we've now accentuated that. And we've added the stainless steel base, and we've extended it all the way up. Jade?
Thank you, Al. So basically, since the last time we've met, we've been able to kind of advance the design of the landscape further. I think we're still trying to maintain the spirit of the plant palette being plant assemblages rather than looking at individual plant species and how they are appear together, but rather how they perform together. And so there's further in the package, there is a full plant list if you are interested in the plant species that we've incorporated. We are still incorporating a green roof. We're obviously very limited. We're trying to balance sort of the ecological function and function, or ecological function and the function of the site. And so there's working in as much natural area around the parking as possible. We've incorporated a natural self meadow over here. And then, like as Al mentioned, we have an employee amenity over here. Let me advance.
Those are the original renderings of the previous design that was presented to you back in December. We included those so that you can see how the design has advanced. And if you go to the next two slides, these are the slides that we presented in our April package that we looked at, and that led us to now where we completely taken a different approach, what you see in the design of the building today.
Okay, so I'm gonna just advance this. So here's the site landscape plan. And like I said, we still are maintaining the green roof. We are incorporating solar panels over the warehouse side of the building. We're incorporating the south meadow here, landscape, vegetated areas as much as possible. We do have this DEP easement that runs on the north side of the building. North is up to the right. And then, as Al mentioned, we have this employee amenity area here for the employees and the visitors to the site. That's the next slide. So basically for the plant palette, we looked at breaking the site down into different areas, and this is based off of the site context. Understanding that the area near the waterfront here is going to have a lot more salt deposition, salt water inundation. Also too with snow management in the winter months, in the parking areas, we're obviously going to have to deal with that. So the plant palette responds to this environment of being on the waterfront. It's a little bit more harsh. There's a lot more sun, wind. We looked at solar angle, we looked at prevailing winds, and really tried to build the plant palette to be very responsive to these areas of the site specific. And one thing that I do want to note is that on the entrance of the site, we are still working on the sign package. So as soon as that is figured out, we'll be able to kind of tie the signage with the landscape and that entry feature as well. So the employee amenity area will go into greater detail. So this is the area that I mentioned before. This is for the employees, the visitors. We looked at, how they would be utilizing the site, predominantly small gatherings, outdoor dining during the lunch hours. And this would also be programmed up to larger events that Equinor might hold throughout the year. But basically, most of the activity is going to be centered in the back side of the building. I do want to point out that this area right here is where the kitchen and dining area is in the interior of the building. So that is brought out. There's a balcony here that you'll see in subsequent graphics that will show where that balcony is in relation to the entire site. There's also a restroom here. I do want to point out for use of people who are using this back area. There's a central green area here that's just open and formal. And then there's smaller kind of gathering spaces underneath the balcony. Like I mentioned, we added a pergola and then additional trees from when we last spoke in December to increase shade, in addition to the shade that will be provided underneath the balcony. So this is a close-up of the employee amenity area. One thing to note is that there is partially, this area is going to be built on top of a new bulkhead. So this is going to be a landscape on structure, essentially in this area. This area will be all on land at grade. Like I mentioned, here's the restroom access here. This is underneath that covered balcony. This is where within the building, there is indoor dining kitchen area for the employees. This balcony area is an extension of that. There's stairs that lead down into the employee amenity space. This is more of a lounge area. We incorporated a pergola, like I mentioned. There's a wall that separates this area from the back warehouse, which is on the left side of this area. There is requirements around security. So this fence or this wall has to be there, has elements to kind of align with that security that's needed. And then also too, there's a pedestrian gate access here, vehicular gate access. Like I mentioned, this is a DEP easement. There's a culvert. You can kind of see the line work there. There's a culvert in this area where DEP needs regular access for maintenance in that area. One thing I do want to note is that these planters are in ground. This is the only tree that is going to be on the bulkhead. These trees are in planters that will be on land, so there's no structural implications. This one will have structural implications in the design. These trees are at grade planters, and you will see this in the subsequent graphics where we have sections. These are low enough because when in our view shed analysis, there were views of the downtown skyline looking straight north from the site. So you'll be able to see it from the balcony here. And then, of course, direct waterfront access or waterfront views in this area here. This area up here is the laydown area. So we wanted to sort of screen. So we have these trees are a little bit larger, knowing that there's going to be restrictions in size and weight and that sort of thing for this tree in particular. But these trees are left lower on purpose because it sort of frames this use and kind of provides a boundary or somewhat of a screen from this area. This is meant to be overflow. This has to be free, open. We cannot put any permanent structures because it is a DEP easement. So these are purposely low to maintain that view shed here. These are the sections that I mentioned. Here's the balcony. This is looking from the waterfront straight onto the building. This is that balcony that I mentioned. To meet the grades, there's a restroom behind this tree here. To meet the grades of that finished floor elevation, all of this area needs to be built up. So we are incorporating a lightweight concrete over the bulkhead to raise these elevations up, and everything is going to be sloped. So you can kind of see this actually cuts through the middle of this green area here, but all of these areas will slope down at approximately 2%. So along the waterfront here and along the back of the building here will be approximately 2%. And it'll reach existing grades here. We built this up slightly because we're having vehicle rated pavers for the vehicles that will come in here occasionally. Here's the planters that I mentioned will be sitting on grade. There will be seat walls incorporated here along the waterfront. This entire area will be synthetic turf because of the nature of what's going to be in here. With Equinor is planning on using this for lawn games, yoga, just open kind of leisure time. It's really meant to be very flexible for various uses that will occur throughout the year. And like I mentioned, there's a pergola here, and then there's a vegetated kind of background or there's this wall here, and this is meant to just kind of soften that wall slightly and provide additional shade. And then this section here is looking from the area where the pergola is, looking towards the wall here, but it just shows that transition then coming from the restroom of the building, which is right here. And it slopes down, and then this will all be elevated with lightweight concrete on top of the bulkhead. We originally looked at pedestals, but in speaking with the structural engineer, he felt that we could certainly use lightweight concrete, and it was a more economical option. But essentially the way the drainage works is that all the water is essentially draining this direction towards the parking lot. So all of this drains down towards the parking lot. So there won't be any sort of exposed drains. We're still working out what the drainage will look like in here because we have to have aggregate for the synthetic turf, and it has to drain. So we're still looking at that and how that would flow. And I think that is it. But there's a lot that we've developed since our meeting in December, and we have a lot of different visuals that we can point to a reference to if needed, if anybody has additional questions.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions or comments?
Right, I can start. Thank you for the presentation and thank you for all of the additional materials. I think the design intention is a lot clearer since we met last. And I think, understanding how you plan to program this employee space has really led to some design adjustments that are, I think, a lot more practical and make a lot of sense for the site, given the limited footprint. So thank you for that. I do still have a couple of questions and comments that I'm going to go through. The first one is the trees on that multi-use plaza. You kept calling them to be at grade, but the section actually shows them on raised planters. And one of them right where you have your cut, like the one to the top is on the bulkhead, and the middle one is halfway through the bulkhead and the last one, it's not on the bulkhead. So I'm not fully understanding, yeah, this diagram exactly. So these 3 trees on the multi-use plaza, the first 2 are on the bulkhead, and the last one is at grade. No, the 3 trees on the multi-use plaza, yes. Mhm.
So these are just going to be on the plan.
They're planters.
They're just planters, as opposed to these are integrated walls built into and integrated.
How tall are those planters? Okay.
I think they're 4 feet.
The reason I'm asking that is because on the section, the planters look rather large, and in a way they start creating a separation of spaces between the lawn area and the multi-use area. If that's the intent, I think that's fine, but I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to make that into a more robust design intention. Like, for example, could those planters actually be a continuous raised planter that includes trees and landscaping, and in that sense gives an edge to that lawn? Right now, it feels like the space in between perhaps is not, is not that well used. And this would be a nice way to give that a bookend against what is a very large and open plaza that I know you cannot put stuff on it because of the easement, but it would just maybe allows the employee area to be more enclosed in landscape and a little bit more comfortable. That's just one design suggestion.
Yeah, we thought about that, but I think the reason why we didn't provide a continuous planter was just because we wanted to be able to make this area feel like it's in like one giant space, even though this is kind of the central area. We were worried about having this feel cut off, and this is just kind of here and left behind. That was the only reason why we didn't have a continuous planter here, or really kind of mimic what we're having over here, exactly how we have over here. We just wanted to give some kind of indication of a barrier without providing a barrier.
It's right now it's neither here nor there. I guess it's the issue that I'm having. It does feel cut off because it's not going to be the most pleasant space to sit on that bench or that edge of the lawn looking at a planter that is way above your eye level. So it's just a point of consideration. Do you fully want to feel it, make it feel integrated? In which case, maybe the height of those planters needs to be rethought and the planting itself needs to be rethought, because obviously you do need the 4 feet of soil to make the tree survive.
Yes.
Or do you fully want it to be screened? Spatially, it just feels like the 2 spaces are kind of not speaking to each other right now.
Well, so we're very limited, and without completely building up this area and integrating it within this has to be raised. And in order to make it feel like it is not really responding to what's going on below, which we're trying to avoid. We can certainly lower the planters, but I wouldn't want to lower them much more because we do need the soil volume.
Yeah, you can't lower them more for the soil. I'm just asking you to think of it spatially. It's an odd relationship that's left over by having to have such raised planters to sustain the trees against the lawn on what is a very narrow space. So spatially, is that the best use of the space, or could you think of it in a different way so that they're either fully separated or fully integrated? I think they're just neither here nor there right now, but it's a point of consideration for you.
Sure.
Another element you mentioned is that you're not having area drains. You're shedding all of the water to this edge.
Yes.
Is that correct? That seems like a lot of water, especially when we're in the waterfront and this area can be flown to flooding. So one idea is that maybe you start thinking of that planter as an actual bioretention planter that is designed to have a low point, that is designed to have French drains.
Okay.
Because if not, I'm not really sure where your water's going.
Yeah, we can look at that certainly. I think we could look at that.
And where's the flow of water right now? If you don't have drains, where is it exiting?
So all of it is everything, because of the bulkhead, we can't drain back into the water. So everything this is a high point up here. relatively speaking. This is the highest point here. And everything slopes this direction
And then goes where?
And flows
Water's not
here.
gonna do that.
and flows
Water's all
here.
gonna accumulate on that corner right there.
Well, this is higher. This area is higher than this.
So you're shedding all of the square footage of impervious surface through
Down
these
here.
very small gates. You're gonna create a lot of issues here. I think I understand that you cannot have area drains, but I do think you need to think of those planters as areas that will collect some of that overflow. Otherwise, you're gonna have water accumulating in corners. You're gonna have a lot of water coming down the parking lot at that particular moment where you have a big storm event. And you could also have a lot of issues with ponding and ice forming in the winter.
We can certainly raise this with the civil engineer and bring this up. I think, this area is very limited in space for what we can do for a larger event. But we could certainly, I think this area makes sense. This area particularly makes sense. We're going to be limited here. But I can raise that with the civil engineer.
I think you guys just need to look at it. This is a lot of hardscape without drains. To me, it raises a concern. My last comment has to do with the shade structure. I think it's really nice that you're adding that and you're basically anchoring this outdoor area with something that's, an architectural feature. It seems, I think right now more of an intention and a little bit underdeveloped in the architectural expression. And I really like the way the building is headed in terms of its expression, its use of materials. So I'm wondering if there's a way to introduce some of that architectural vocabulary to that pergola. So the pergola does feel like it's part of the larger complex as opposed to an added element to the open space.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in terms of materiality, color. We're also talking about that with this wall too, in the way that it's treated and bringing in some of those vertical elements. So yes, that is something we are talking about. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, I just also wanted to compliment the design team because I think that there's been a lot of advancement with the project and especially the building and the facade. It's looking really great and the detailing is very exciting that you're thinking about that so carefully. So I had a question, kind of a detail, and maybe we'll see more about this, is the stainless steel.
Yes.
And the finish of the stainless steel. I'm just concerned if it's polished.
No, it's not. It's
It
gonna
looks
be-
polished in the rendering.
No,
like-
yes, and I understand that you would have that concern, but no, it won't be polished in that respect.
Mhm.
Okay, let me see if we
Yeah,
have
the
it.
base and the columns.
Yeah,
there,
it's
down
based
there.
on what we're talking about here. It's going to be treated in such a way that it'll have a texture to it, so it won't be a direct bright panel when you're
Mhm.
looking at it. So we are going to diffuse it from
Yeah.
that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great choice of material, so.
Yes, it is. I think it's going to be a very nice facade by the time it's all
Yeah.
completed.
So then in those columns too, where you're wrapping the columns, though, that's the same material?
That
Or
would
is
be
it
the same
same
material,
material?
yes.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if we get to see a sample of it or if that ship has sailed, but love to see that, what it looks like. And then I also had a question about the shade structure
Mhm.
and who the architect designer is of that, because I mean, it looked very simple and elegant. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to look like the building. I mean,
Right.
I just want to know what it is. I want to know what the intention of that is. And I mean, it looks like it's TBD, right? So we
we are.
because we're going to see it from the water front. I'm thinking about my public that I'm representing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we're still looking at color. We're still looking at, what this is going to look like. I am talking with the architecture team and how to kind of marry the two together. We're
Mhm.
trying to kind of marry the colors that we're using. Now that the building has changed, we're looking at marrying the colors of everything. And this is also changing the site furniture that we're using. And we're all kind of working through this now. And as soon as we nail that down, we'll be able to present that to.
Okay,
to
so we'll
Ecuador.
just look forward to seeing that design
But I
in section.
yeah,
And then the other question I had was the section going east-west. And I guess only that I was wondering at the entry And I know you've got everything raised up because of the flood, right? And so that area where you're showing the stainless steel, is that a floodable area? I'm just,
Well,
my own, yeah, I'm curious.
We're intending to use dry flood proofing devices everywhere. So all the doors, for example, are going to have, they're going to have the ability for flood proofing, except for the 2 entrance doors. There we will be using stop logs that'll be placed into pockets that'll be located within the slab. So the thing is, at that location, we're still within the flood zone, so to speak. So we do have to protect it, and that's the best way to do that at those positions. Everywhere else, though, everywhere there's a man door, those doors are actually flood doors. They'll be stainless steel and finish, and they're designed so that you don't have to provide a third apparatus or a second apparatus in front of it. It'll actually seal and protect the door. And the same thing with the roll-up doors. The roll-up doors are actually flood doors.
I see.
Okay, so that was the whole reason for
Yeah,
that
just curious.
being engaged that way. And those will also be stainless steel and finish as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Because the site floods so much, does the parking lot landscaping include any bioretention ponds, swales, any type of passive way to handle the flood?
We talked about that very early in the project,
Mm-hmm.
the way that that's okay. We talked about that, thank you. We talked about that very early on in the project, but the way that the stormwater has been permitted, we're only managing what falls on it, essentially.
You mean you're taking it all to the storm sewer? Is there any way that the South Meadow specifically on the parking lot is quite large?
It is.
Is there no way that you could incorporate? Why would that not be an option to incorporate some sort of, passive bioretention method?
That is an opportunity, but the way that the building design and the site design has worked out, it's just, that is the way that it was permitted.
Okay. So this has been permitted already?
From a stormwater standpoint, from my understanding.
Well, I do think it's a missed opportunity. And I'm curious also why you've achieved already a permit when we're still in such preliminary stages. In this entity.
It's submitted.
Submitted.
Yes, this is,
Yeah, here.
this is Brian Turner. He is in charge of our permitting for Equinor.
We've submitted permits on outfalls on stormwater to the Army Corps and state as part of our environmental assessment. The actual Department of Building Permits has been pulled together for submittal, but it hasn't obviously been permitted or issued yet because we're waiting for PDC approval.
So is this not under DEP jurisdiction in terms of drainage?
It's
DEP, no, it does have, I believe, DEP approval.
yeah, I'll have DEP approval for the outfall for the stormwater management.
DEP,
Yes.
okay. It sounds like you're still in the process of developing this. The reason I'm pointing this out is because you have a lot of hardscape. You have a lot of asphalt on that parking lot, which is inevitable. It's part of the program, but you're also on a flood site. So I do think this is an opportunity to create, even if it's just one stormwater garden on that South Meadow, it's a great opportunity to manage your storm water, minimize what's going into the system, but also potentially create a demonstration project for the community, for the employees of the area. Equinor it's leading the charge on sustainable energy. Could the landscape of the project also be a demonstration of sustainable water management, given the site conditions? It's just food for thought for the team.
Understood.
It's something we'll look at further. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate, I think the design's really evolved too, the facade. I think, yeah, it looks great. I think it's great that you've, kind of thought of, architectural approaches and material approaches to kind of branded expression. I think that's a real evolution from just using the color. So I'm looking forward to seeing how, the word mark or the lockup itself gets used. I mean, I think you say it's placeholder, but I think it is worth exploring, like, the size relationships between, say, the word mark and the symbol. They don't necessarily need to be locked up either. I think that could be also an exploration to do as well, because right now it just kind of looks plopped on to that, kind of very dynamic and beautiful kinetic wall. So
Right. Well,
I think
the whole thing right now is the signage and the naming of the project is still under consideration by Equinor and how they want to brand that, and not necessarily brand it in the way that is more of a corporate brand, but more in what the site is and tying it back towards wind energy and going in that direction. So that's why right now it's really just meant to be a placeholder in both locations. So that gives us an opportunity to incorporate something. And we've also looked at how that would get built and mounted, et cetera. So that's something that we will have to develop further as well as far as the detailing.
So Equinor, like the logo makes this more as like a signature, and then the name of the site will have a different name.
Well, the name of the site will have a very specific name.
Okay.
Calvin, do you want to speak to that, please?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the building is our operations and maintenance base for the Empire Wind and Beacon Wind project. And then the control room is hopefully for up to 10 wind farms across the US and even up to 14. So because of that, we recently in Astoria announced our Astoria Center for Renewable Energy, right? Rather than naming it the Beacon Wind type point of interconnect. And so we're looking at whether that makes doing something along those lines. It is a partnership project as well between Equinor and BP. So because a number of pieces there, we want to make sure we brand it in a way that fits with the community and fits with what we're trying to deliver overall, not just plop a logo on there. If that's ultimately the right way to do it, we'll look at that, but we do want to make sure we do a holistic consideration for it.
Great. That sounds great. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. So when returning for review, and I'm going to attempt to summarize some of the recommendations from my fellow commissioners. The multi-use plaza, I think there is a strong desire for continuity and another look at the planters so that it allows employees a more pleasant experience and to reconsider it spatially. Also, strong concern about no area drains. And this is an area prone to flooding. So bioretention and planters to collect the overflow, strong recommendation there as well. A couple of commissioners commented on the pergola, the shade structure, and wanting it to be more architecturally significant and thought out. Also, the parking lot, sorry, architecturally resolved. Yes. Okay. There you go. Fair. The parking lot also need to look at passive bioretention methods, potentially storm water garden, and with that, I also just want to recognize Commissioner Miranda's thoughtful comments on appropriate contextual signage. But with all of that, this project has a recommendation for consent with the conditions stated. All right, and therefore, this concludes our meeting and the public meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.